This video is going to step you through setting up the GUI elements for the UI Sampler GUI lab. Keep in mind that there will be another video for setting up the programming aspects of this lab. This one is just about setting up the visual elements. So I have a new project already started, and I do have a couple things already added for a demonstration I'm going to give in a moment, but I'll talk about how to get to at least this step. All UI elements in Unity need to have a canvas associated with them. And that's this element right here. Any kind of text, button, or GUI element needs to go underneath this canvas. And we also need to keep this event system in our scene as well. If this accidentally gets deleted, your UI will no longer work. You can always recreate this if this does get deleted, but try your best not to delete that. To create a canvas, you just right-click, Game Object, UI, and the canvas is found right here. And that's what I already did. I also added a couple text elements that will eventually be deleted. You don't have to add these. I just want to use this to help explain how the canvas works. You want to make sure that you set up your canvas correctly when you first create it, or you're going to end up spending a lot of time fixing your UI later. By default, the canvas scalar is set to constant pixel size. And what this means is if your screen resolution changes, all of your UI elements stay the same pixel size, which sounds good, but I can show you what happens when you have it set to this. So if we go to game, it looks like our scene where the text is right up against the edges, top and bottom. But what happens if our game screen changes sizes? Like if you decide to change resolution. If we start scaling it to make it bigger, for instance, and we hit play, notice that the text is no longer right up against the edge. And when you are trying to set up buttons to be in like specific spots, like along the edges, this isn't going to work out very well. So rather than have it set on our canvas to constant pixel size, we actually want to change it to scale with screen size. And this, it does mess up for a moment, but we can fix that pretty easily. This makes it so that if your screen changes, they're always in the same spot on the screen. So we'll have to just fix this once, and then it'll maintain its position when the screen scales. See how they get smaller, then they get bigger? It works out a lot better. So make sure underneath canvas scalar on your canvas we do scale with screen size. You should probably pick a good reference resolution. I think in this class we're usually going to do 800 by 600 or 400 by 300. But for this one we'll just stick with 800 by 600. And I've also had better luck with it working a little bit nicer if I change this all the way to match height rather than match width. It seems to overall work a little bit nicer with that. So let's go back to the scene tab, and I am going to actually delete out these text objects. So this is what you should be starting with. So make sure the canvas screen space overlay, we're always going to be working with this in class, so don't change that. Scale with screen size, 800 by 600, and match height. So if we look at the lab, the first thing I'm going to show you, if you kind of look at the directions, is we need to have 5 different panels. And panels are really great for kind of keeping our UI elements that are similar together, rather than having a whole bunch of like buttons and text just kind of floating into space. Even if we turn them invisible, it's just nice to have them to keep things well organized. All the panel really does is just hold elements to it. So to create a panel, we're going to right-click on Canvas, go to UI, and choose Panel. And we see that, oops, sorry. Also, one thing I should note, when you're in working with UI in your scene, always make sure you have your 2D clicked on. It works a little bit better this way because you have it, it's framed in nicely. We don't have to worry about any kind of 3D space. So for this panel, the first one needs to be called Test Panel. This is going to be that central one right here. And I'm just going to keep it like that gray color. So I'm going to just rename this up here to test panel. I do want to keep it like a gray. And right now it does have some transparency to it. That's what the A in RGBA stands for. So if we don't want any transparency, we can pull it all the way up and it will be fully opaque. I do need to scale this down, and I can just do this by clicking and dragging one of these corners and kind of fitting it a little bit better to what I'm probably going to need. So let's take a look at what it looks like in play. And it's getting close. The one big difference though is we don't have that skybox as our background. Since we're only working with UI elements, it kind of looks a little bit silly to have a skybox. So let's go make that change right now. To change what the background looks like in your whole entire scene is done through the main camera. So if we go to our main camera, we can change it underneath here where it says skybox underneath clear flags. Skybox gets changed to solid color, and we can see in our camera preview what that's going to kind of look like. And I kind of want to keep it with what is going on in the lab, so I'm going to just make it like a darker gray. So now if we hit play, we have our one box and we have our nice gray background. So let's keep on moving. I forgot. Nope, that didn't take. Let's try this again. Test panel. There we go. Okay, I'm going to resize this a little bit, and I do need some more panels. I need 4 more panels. So I'm going to just right click on canvas, UI, panel. I'm going to resize it, and this is going to be my inputs panel. So I'm going to call this, rather than just panel, input. And I'm going to change the color to like a bluish purple. And maybe just make it not transparent anymore. There we go. And I just need to do this for the 3 others. If you already have one UI element, something you can do to help kind of speed up time rather than trying to hunt around in the new create menu, we can just right click and choose duplicate. This will duplicate the object, so we can position it, and we can rename this then to button panel. I'll change the color to like a yellow. I'll again right click, duplicate, move this one over here, change this one to Dropdown Panel, and give it an orange color, and then duplicate it one more time to right about here, and call this one Slider Panel. And make sure that this is like a greenish sort of color. Okay, so that is all the panels that we need for this assignment. Oh, I just didn't rename. Let's try that again. Slider Panel. So notice that these are children of the canvas. If these are not children of the canvas, they're not going to work properly. So if you did accidentally make one of these outside, all you have to do is click and drag so they hover over the canvas and drop in. Make that popped out a little bit. Okay, so let's double check. Let's hit play. Maybe make sure this is on an 8x. Oh wait, that looks strange. Hold on. Clicking the wrong buttons. There we go. Okay, so let's move on and let's start adding our text elements. You're going to have to do a lot of text elements, but these are really easy to do, kind of like the panels. All they are words on the screen. So the first one we're going to work with is going to be nested inside of our text or test panel. So I'm going to come over to the test panel, right click, UI, and we're going to be making these text right here, text. So the first one is going to be called name text. So I'm just going to right away come up and rename this to name text. And we can see by default it's right here. And we have a couple things that we can use to make this look a little bit nicer. First things first, underneath text we can change the wording. So I'm going to call this one Amber Johnson's UI Sampler. And notice that we can't see all of it. That is because the text that we have is larger than this box that we have. So if you're ever working with stuff and it ever disappears, like if you make it too big, all you have to do is resize this box and you can see all of your text. Some other things, we can change the font size. That's really tiny. So let's bump this up to maybe like a 24. I do have to make this a little bit bigger now. And I can also change the alignment. Since it's supposed to be kind of centered, it's a little bit easier if I do a center align to align it in the center. The other thing that we can change too is the color. It'd be nice to change this to a white color so we can see this a little bit nicer. So I'm just similar to changing the color of the panels, I'm going to change it to white. And that is our first one. So we have to make a bunch of other ones, and they are going to be associated with other panels. We have one more here, so I'm going to, kind of similar to the panels, once I create one, I'm just going to right click and duplicate this. Move this one down. This one is supposed to be called test text. So I'm just going to rename that test text. And I'm just going to change the wording to test. This one also needs to be a lot bigger. So I'm going to bump up the size. Notice that it looks like it disappeared. Again, this is because the box isn't big enough. So I'm just going to kind of start making it bigger. I can squish it up a little bit too. And this one, I'm actually going to do like it's center aligned this way. I'm going to center align it this way too. So it's right in the middle. And maybe make it just a little bit bigger. There we go. Kind of line this up in here. All right, so our test panel's all done. So I'm just going to click this arrow to minimize this. We don't need to really look at that anymore. And let's go around and add the rest of our text. So I'm going to do the input one kind of from scratch. I'm not going to duplicate it in case you need to see that again. On the input panel, I'm going to right click, UI, text. I'm going to change this to say inputs. I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. It's kind of small right now. And change the color to white. This is just meant as kind of like a label for this panel. So we can just kind of go up there. And that's good enough. Next, I'm going to do one for the button panel. Right click, UI, text. It's just going to say buttons. Make this a little bit bigger. Turn this to white. Let's move that up over there. Same thing for the drop down. Throughout this class, you're going to be doing UI for every single assignment that you do. So get used to doing this stuff now. You're going to be experts by the end of the semester. Sliders. And that is all of the text elements we need. All right, so let's move on to the rest of the stuff that we need. Let's do the drop downs first. We need to add one drop down. We're not going to change anything about this other than adding it and making sure it's named correctly. We're going to deal with the text inside of the drop down in the next video when we deal with the programming of this. So my drop down panel, I'm going to right click, go to UI, and choose drop down. Right in the middle, that looks perfect. And I'm going to make sure that it's named drop down. And it is. So that one's done. We're good with that. So I am going to then close this up because we're done with that one. Next, we can add a slider to the sliders panel. So I'm going to right click on the slider panel, go to UI, and add a slider. It pops it right in the middle of that panel, and that's perfect. Again, let's make sure it's named slider. That's what it's supposed to be called. And that panel's done. Next, let's work on the buttons panel. This is going to need 4 different buttons on it, and they're going to end up doing different things. Get used to making buttons. Every single lab you do in this program is going to have at least 1 button on it. So you're going to be experts. Again, by the end of the semester, you're going to be experts at this. So underneath the button panel, right here, right-click, UI, button. And it's a little bit more complex than some of the ones we've been working with, where it's actually made up of 2 different, if you see this, 2 different elements. The button itself and this text object. The text object is just the word that appears over the button. So, we don't want to call it button. We're going to call this one random number. And this works just like the text that we did over here, so we could change the font size, we could change the color, we could change the alignment, we could do whatever we need, just like the text object, because it is a text object. Up here is the button that, notice the text is a child of the button, so if we move the button object, the whole thing moves. So if you grab it and you're accidentally moving the name around, check your hierarchy, make sure you're on the button and not the text. So let's rename this button to random button. We'll just come over here, add random, and maybe squish this up just a little bit. It's kind of big. Similar to what I did with the text, now that I have 1 button, I can just right-click, duplicate, and I'll just slide this one down. This one will be called the reset button, so I'll just come over here and rename this. And I'll go inside of that text and change it to say reset. And I will duplicate, oops, not that one. Duplicate another button. Slide it over. This is going to be my rotate button, so I'm going to rename it. Go inside and change the text. And I just need 1 more button, so let's go and duplicate this. Slide it down. And this is going to be our quit button, so let's rename it to quit button. Go inside the text and change this to quit. There we go. All of our buttons are done. So all we need, we can close this up. We don't need to look at any of this stuff. The last one is the inputs. This has 2 input fields and 1 button. So we're going to go over to the input panel, right click, go to UI, and choose input field. This is kind of similar to the buttons where it has multiple things. So if we open this up, we have the input field, which is the big main part. And we have a placeholder, which is the placeholder text. You can see right now it says enter text. And then the text itself would be what the text looks like when it's actually typed in. So the placeholder text for this first one, we want to say first number. And we also want to make sure that it's not called input field, it's called first input. So we're going to come and rename this. And this first one's done. Similar to the buttons in the text, once I have 1 done, I'm just going to right click and duplicate this. Slide it down. This one's called second input, so we'll write second input. And we want to make sure that we change that placeholder text in there. So let's open this up and call it second number. The last thing we need is a button, so that after some numbers are put in there, we can click a button and it's going to do something. So let's go over making a button from scratch. On the input panel, I'm going to right click, UI, button. And this button needs to be named input button. So let's just change the name real fast. And let's go in and change the text. It's supposed to say calculate. And this one we'll just make a little bit bigger just to show that you can. And one last thing is we want to make the button look orange, just so it kind of differentiates these. We do that underneath the button inspector, so we go back up to input button. And the color is right here, so we can just kind of go in, similar to changing the text, similar to changing the panels, and choose a new color for our button. And it changes. So we're actually all done. That's it. We have our UI all set up, ready to go for the next part, where we're going to actually do some programming. Everything's going to do something in this. So hopefully this was helpful to you, and I'll talk to you in the next video.